go into a corner and say, we thought he was going to be nice, and he's turned out to be our real... So I'll try and be nice. I'll try and be nice. I'm a kind of Jewish Kojak, really. Who loves you, baby? Weird kind of ritual gets into the whole thing when you... All actors set their stuff out in a different way. It becomes quite kind of tetchy. I feel myself growing old and set in my ways. Security blankets these are, I suppose. Cough tablets, which I cut each one in half. Half lasts about 10 minutes, which is about right before a show. And if you cut them in half, they last twice as long. You never know what kind of a situation you're going to find yourself in. It's best to carry your own. Clothes brush in a certain way, hairbrush in a certain place. I feel like Bernard Shaw towards the end of his life. And then we tidy the case away. And you sit, and you have a think. Oh, that's a bit new. This we have now, all the time. Powder. Pancake. It would be unthinkable to have that side, and that side. Ridiculous. The whole business is ridiculous. It really isn't all that unusual, you know, that people have had a death in their family. To most people, if you say, yes, but he was a great talent, they could be forgiven by saying, does that in any way make it any different to the fact he was only 25? And that, of course, is the hump that you can't get over. The death of a young man. The what might have been. The intellect, you know, can look after grief up to about 80%. I can control all the things to do with the fact that he had a peaceful end, that he had his friends near, that he died swiftly and cleanly, and he was brought home by kindly men who did everything, that people wrote to us from all over the world. All these things, I can see in it the gentle mercy of God. But beyond the 80%, the heart gets in the way. That's when you're in trouble.
Roger, it's his birthday today.
Is it really, Jack?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes.
Yes, I have heard that.
And now I'm here. I'm here. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening. And if you will permit me, may I also wish you shalom. And this is what the day is all about. All the driving, all the preparation. I'm here, they are not certain of me, and I am not certain of them. So, let battle commence. Now, friends, you can always tell with the BBC by the kind of lunch they give you, the sort of a deal that they have in mind. And this was not a carry-your-own-tray affair. No, this was the works, a tablecloth and everything. And not just a will you have a brandy, Kossoff, but Kossoff, what kind of brandy would you like? I didn't know there was more than one kind. Yes, Kossoff, they said, we saw it, and we wondered, Kossoff, they said, whether you would care to write and tell some Bible stories for us on the wireless. They actually said, the wireless, dear quaint things. And I said, yes, of course. I said, yes, of course. I said, certainly. I said, of course, yes, yes. I said, after all, a distinguished Bible scholar like myself with one Bible story behind me. I said, yes, of course. Mind you, that's one of the first things you learn in my business. Never to say no. Never to say no. It's very difficult for young actresses just beginning. For which heaven be praised. Yes, I said, of course. I said, certainly. I said, tell me, I said helpfully, tell me, what did you have in mind? And they said, well, Kossoff, they said, we thought you'd fit rather well into the morning religious program called 5 to 10. Now, friends, I don't know whether you remember what the 5 to 10 program was like up until about 11 years ago. What it was like, if you will permit me, pre-Kossoff. It was a program which had not changed in 15 years. It was always exactly the same. You probably remember. There was a little bit of organ music, wasn't there? There was a psalm or two. There were some ladies and gentlemen singing a hymn. And then there was a little chat, a kind of mini sermonette. And then the time signal. And it is the considered opinion of some of the finest theological minds in this country that the most enlightening part of the program was the time signal. Well, about 3 days, children, after the end of the first month on the wireless, as though you wouldn't know, the telephone rang again. We live in a very exciting house. And this time it was the other television. And they have a different voice. Hello, Davy boy, how are you keeping? Davy boy, they said. Now then, tell me, they said. Now what, Davy boy, they said. Davy, they said. Now listen, what about a couple of glasses of lunch? But it was a very good lunch, I remember. It was a very good lunch, and they came straight to the point. Now look, Davy, love, they said, now look, Davy boy, they said, now look, you know all about it, don't you, son? They said, you've been around telly long enough, you know what it's all about, don't you, son? Tell you what, they said, tell you what, you design the program. You tell us how many you want to do, you tell us what you want it called, you tell us how much you want, and we'll pay for everything, which I thought was a very reasonable offer. Here you are. Here you are. This is from the beginning of the book. Indeed, from the very beginning of anything. The very beginning of time. The dawn of history, page 1, nothing at all. The earth, as the Bible itself beautifully puts it, without form and void. Only, even more beautifully, the Spirit of God moving over the face of the waters. An emptiness, formless, a dark, endless waste of water, no living thing, no plant or tree, nothing. Nothing. A void. It must have been very dull for God. I've thought so since a child. Now, I was the sort of child who used to like to know why. And I once asked a learned uncle why God made the world. My uncle thought hard. I waited. My aunt, too. I waited. They were both clever. And then my uncle said, well, he had to do something to occupy himself. And my aunt said, David, you ask me why. Tell me, darling, why not? And the thought was planted and grew into a picture in the mind, a picture that I have to this day. A picture of God looking out over an endless dark sea, a quiet, thoughtful God who'd been by himself for a long time, feeling sort of empty, maybe even lonely. Now there's a thought, maybe even lonely, sitting silent, still. I've had letters from people who are quite positive that because I've written a lot of Bible stories, I have a certain familiarity with God. I used to make jokes about it, having, as it were, a kind of direct line that I could say a word or two, confident that the boss was hearing me, that I was a kind of PRO and therefore was a member of the staff. Well, I don't think that Paul's death changed my belief or my relationship with God in any way. I was pretty sure that the mercy was there. Now, Paul did not have this relationship. He grew up in a Jewish house, but not a very Jewish house, not a very deeply observing house, and Paul was rejecting that kind of thing. He did not have a kind of God sense at all. I mean, most people run reasonable lives because they're kind of doing a deal all the time with God. That if I'm good, he'll be good to me, or if I keep the set of 10 rules, then I'll be all right. Well, I don't think Paul had that at all. And yet I have an absolute conviction that he didn't need to. That what he essentially was, God knew. Maybe God was fairly happy with this untidy young man. Perhaps God loved him. And that's why he died young. Nothing stops because somebody died. You get on with it, which everybody discovers, of course. You walk along thinking that everybody knows by one glance at you that you've recently had a death in the family. But they don't. You get on with it. You go to your factory or to your office, or in my case, I just get on with being a performer. And the thought was planted and grew into a picture in the mind, a picture that I have to this day. A picture of God looking out over an endless sea. A God who'd been by himself for a long time, sitting rather thoughtfully, feeling sort of empty, maybe even lonely. Now there's a thought, maybe even lonely, sitting silent, still, and then suddenly thinking, I know, I'll make a world. I need to do something to occupy myself. And after all, why not? Now, before God started to make the world, he gave it a lot of thought. It was a big job. Not much to go on. No previous experience in such work, and not really good materials either. Just a vast midnight, always dark, covering a great waste of nothing but water. Right, said God, first things first, some light to work by. Let there be some light. And there was. Well, that's a pleasant effect, thought God, and turned it off and on once or twice. Make up your mind, it's going to be that kind of an evening. There is still time to leave. And then God thought of a way to improve on his day and night invention, which was a bit hard on the eyes in its sudden change. So he hung outside his new home 2 globes of light, one large to look after the day, and the other smaller for the night. And there were no more sudden changes. As one dimmed, so the other came on, and as that dimmed, the other came on, and also he named them. The larger he called sun, and the smaller moon. And then he made 1,000,000 smaller moons, and he called them stars, and he scattered them. And God was enjoying himself. The greatest artist of them all was having fun and not feeling quite so lonely. Next, said God, things that move, that fly and crawl and swim and walk. And he used every color and shape and texture that came into his mind. Huge sea monsters, tiny birds, exquisite insects, delicate dancing creatures, and slow, heavy ones. Nothing was forgotten. Nothing was forgotten, not a feather, not a fin. And remembering his arrangement for the plants, he gave to the living things their seeds too. Multiply, he said. Multiply, fill the seas and the sky and the land. There's plenty of room. There's plenty of room. And God was pleased with his work, but had an odd feeling still of loneliness, of something still to do. You rest in a peaceful place, son, in a summer house near quiet people and shady trees and roses. It's not quite you, but neither would most other resting places be. Not much to see, an oaken strip with carved lettering picked out in black and gold. Most elegant. Your name, your opening and closing dates, and the title of your 1,000,000 seller, All Right Now. All right now seems apt. You had words, my son, and used them well. A good use of your own words. Agreed? Good. For argument between us on the matter would now be, beloved son, sadly one-sided. So sleep easy. None of your old enemies know where you are. Quiet pools and shady trees are not there seen. Poppies they like, not roses. You would be surprised, beloved son, how much love you inspired, which endures. For, to be honest, you put yourself out for nobody. Certainly you found other things too much trouble also, like malice, or envy, or enmity, or prejudice. A mystery, this legacy of love you left, for you went to no trouble to create it. None. You had no memory for birthdays or anniversaries. You didn't write letters or make phone calls. You had no sense of duty, of filial or familial things. You didn't keep in touch. A puzzlement, the whole thing. Humor you had, with a gentle edge. Acceptance you had. A clue, perhaps. You accepted people. Alas, many wrong ones, too. And they were in some way warmed. And when so young you were gone, they found love for the giver of warmth. So many they were, you'd be surprised, beloved son. Your grandfather, who died before you were born, was a loving man. Were you him again, beloved son? Briefly visiting. And God was pleased with his work, but had an odd feeling still of loneliness, of something still to do. He sat looking down into a calm lake, down at his own reflection. And then he smiled. That's it, he said. I'll make someone to talk to. I'll make a man. He can look like me. That's it.
I'm very moved indeed by this kind of a welcome. I've been long enough in the business to know that there is applause and applause. And I know that in this applause there is a little sharing of trouble. And I want you to know it does not pass unnoticed. The year will be taken up with performances that were to be performances of Thanksgiving. Well, there is still Thanksgiving in it. But it is now a memorial. I was asked this evening, how can I go onto a stage and be funny? Well, being funny is my trade. Being an entertainer is my business. There's a very old story about a man who wished to give thanks. And he had no money. He did not have money to buy a candle, even. He did not have education. It was necessary for him to give thanks. So he stood in front of the altar and he did the only thing he knew how to do. He juggled with 3 clubs until he was absolutely exhausted. And a priest watched him and understood. You also understand. Shalom.